Okay, our second ammo box project finished. This is a small ammo box that we've packed a lot of goodies into it. So what we've got here is the main control panel with the ability to charge a phone with a USB output. I'll show you that in a moment. On this side we have a light, and then we have down the bottom here the ability to recharge the battery using solar. We'll go over that. And on this side we have a large bright light that's used for illuminating a campground. So let's take this thing for a spin. Power it up, and then you can see the voltmeter comes on, tells us what the state of charge of our system is. And for USB plugs, lift that. We've got 2 ports there, a 1 amp and a 2.1 amp, so charge a couple of cell phones or whatever else you might want to charge. Then coming around to this side, we've got the first of the lights. Turn this light on, and it's designed to shine down, so handy to have around a table if you're eating and it's dark. You don't want the light straight in your eyes, so use this one. Puts out quite a nice piece of light. Down the bottom is the solar input, so if I turn that on, it's now ready to receive power from the solar panel through the powerlet plug, and it would register the volts being delivered to the battery and the amps being delivered to the battery as well. Right now, because there's no input, it's showing what's in the system itself generally. And then around this side we've got the large light that's good for illuminating a fair area of the campground, so you can see when that's turned on. So let's just shut the overhead light off here and get a sense of our lights. You can see them all working, and we've got that working. So hope you enjoyed this project. I'll show some details on what went into the project in that tiny little ammo box. There's a lot of stuff packed in there. Okay, now that we've had a look at the full box in operation, let's have a look at how we went about it. So the first thing we needed to do was decide on what the major components were. And the first component, of course, was the ammo box. In this case, bought a new ammo box from Amazon, quite small, so it made it pretty tight to get things in. Next thing I needed was a common bus. I had a terminal block available, so you can see I divided that into a positive and negative side in common. Probably not ideal, but worked. I wanted one charging component in this, so we have 2 USB charging, a 1 amp and a 2.1 amp, and for this project that worked well. For the side light, I selected a light that's LED and shines down, doesn't get in your eyes, so this turned out to be a fairly good selection for this box and fit quite nicely into the side of the ammo box. You would have noticed in the video a number of switches. Managed to find a 6-pack of switches, and these switches are rated to 15 amp. Which is beyond our needs in this box, but good to have that capacity available. Another component that we used on the main side where we power up the box is a voltmeter, so it gives a state of charge of the actual box itself, and this is the particular meter that I selected. And then for the solar side, I wanted to have an amp meter, so I've got a combination amp and voltmeter, and that tells us the charge that's being presented from the charge controller to the battery. Handy to get an idea if the system's actually charging. And of course a battery, in this case I had a 12 amp hour battery that I took out of a US power supply. The solar charger, just a cheap off-the-shelf solar charger. Powerlet plugs, invaluable for bringing the solar power in. The light that goes on the side of the box for lighting the campsite, I selected one that was the right length, in this case 8 inches. It fits on the side of the ammo box. So what are some of the major components that went into this box? So I already showed you the light, but there it is sitting on top of the wiring diagram. We'll talk about that a little later. Various plugs, you'll notice that I also use Anderson Power Pole. Highly recommend those in projects like this. And various connectors. Anytime I use the yellow connectors or the 10-12 gauge, just because I wanted to put 2 wires in one connector, so they work quite good for that. A variety of wires. Mostly I work with 16 gauge wire. In a couple of cases I use 14 gauge. Could have used smaller wire for this project. Some of the major tools that we used is handy drill, of course, and a number of bits for drilling holes. I have a couple of crimpers. In this case, this is a crimper for the Anderson power pole, and I have a different crimper, easy to buy, for the rest of the connectors. A couple of drill bits. These are very handy drill bits when you're drilling into the side of the ammo box. And a hole bit, I use that for one of the larger holes. So the build process was really carefully marking out the ammo box and deciding where the holes needed to go for each of the components that are being installed. One thing to remember is not only do you have to figure out where to place the components on the sides of the ammo box, but you need to make sure that when the components go in, that their length doesn't interfere with other components in the box. So take your time here, mark it out well. You only get one shot at it, and get your holes in, and all should go well. Okay, let's summarize where we got to. When we were looking at the power box earlier, I mentioned the importance of diagrams. Make sure you diagram out all your switches that you use, because it's easy to get quite lost when you're setting up the switches. And also on every power run from the battery and from the solar panel input to the charge controller, I had fuses in line. So remember to put fuses in line on any of the load size. I use 5 and 10 amp fuses, but you should be able to calculate that out. The assembly process is sort of fairly key to concentrate on, and you can sort of see in these diagrams that you sort of need to start from the bottom and work your way up when you're working in a tight space like that, because it doesn't take long to run out of room. So I spent a lot of time putting in the bottom, after I'd drilled everything, putting in the bottom components, wiring those up, and then holding the wires off, make sure I remembered what they were and marked them down, and then just keep working my way up through the box and bringing it all together. In a small box like this, it's especially with the large wires that I was using and the Anderson power pole connectors, it gets extremely busy in there. So it was very hard to make a neat job of that wiring, but all the wiring was able to get in there. If you really want to make a neater wiring job and one that's more serviceable, then I'd recommend that you use a bigger box. Even if you use the box twice the size of this, it still would be a relatively modest size, so that could work well with you. One of the reasons I just wanted to say that I use the Anderson power pole, so I had other connectors that would connect to switches or the controller or to amp meter, etc. So wires coming from those, and then wires going to the bus and the batteries, I wanted to separate those so that I could pull pieces in and out of the ammo box if I needed to do that. So the Anderson power pole connectors were a really good way to be able to bridge one side of the wiring to the other side of the wiring. So one side being the battery and the charge controller side, and the second side of the battery being all of the components that were built into it. So the Anderson power pole connectors just proved really invaluable for that. You could pop them all apart and separate the system. So hope you enjoyed this project. Be interested in your feedback.